Hey everybody, it's Robert Dunt from ArtTop10.com, and I'm here today at Graham Crowley's summer show, Silent Disco, and I'm very happy to be chatting to Kate Bowen. Kate, hello.
Hi, nice to meet you, and just such a privilege to be part of this show.
It's a wonderful show, isn't it? It's really cool. So tell me about your wonderful part in it.
Well, Graham got in touch with me last year, but the exhibition had to go on hold because of the pandemic, and I was actually living in India at the time, but I had been in lockdown back in the UK, so I had got some work over here. But then again, this year I just got back from India, and I had this in my suitcase. And so when Graham said, "Have you got anything that you could pull out for the exhibition?" I said, "Well, I've got, funnily enough, this of a thistle and this of some grasses," and he chose a thistle.
It's a lovely painting. I love the blue on those thistles. So why the thistle? What inspired you to paint the thistle?
So I was working with a botanist out in India, he'd written the books of the trees of Delhi and the native trees of India, and he asked me if I could work with him on a workshop at the Maranga Fort in Jodhpur, teaching Indian people from a total different groups and different backgrounds. Some of them were filmmakers. There were lots of different people, but teaching them about plant life in the desert. He'd rewilded the desert around the fort, where it had been overgrown with this invasive species, a bit like a Japanese knotweed, but of a species called Prosopolis, which is an invasive tree, and it had been put there, I think, by the Brits. And surprise. And it was a fast-growing tree that then just killed everything else in sight, and made it into this desertification around this region. And his job was to take out this tree and rewild it with the native species of plants. So things like the Indian thistle came back to life because of that. And so he spent several years with miners in Rajasthan who were used to chiseling into the rock for minerals, to dig out wherever there was the taproot going down of a tree, and where there was a gap he would then put in some native species of tree or plant, and then it's become this sort of rewilded space full of just incredible plants.
Oh, it's absolutely extraordinary. Sounds quite extraordinary.
But I'm not a botanical artist, but I was asked to go and teach botany, and I then did a series of sketches and drawings and paintings about the surrounding area with him, and put together some work that I was going to put in a show in Delhi, but it never happened because of the pandemic. So it was sort of.
Yeah. So is that actually from sort of life, or is it kind of is it fictionalized? Have you added more of the thistles and bits in, or is it?
It's from life, but it's also from about 7 different sketches from my sketchbook and photographs. So it's not just from one particular plant. And and with the way that I work, I'm really interested in the pigments and the grounds and the quiet mood that you can get just from a very sort of particular pigment or colour. And so for me, it wasn't just about the sand, but it was about the fact that it's on this laterite stone, which has this pink hue. But there's sand in the desert, but there's also this pink hue. So within the picture, behind the backdrop of the thistle, is actually a hint of the stone and the sand all amalgamated.
No, I can see that. You've got that lovely sense of it in the background, which is really cool, and it goes beautifully with the blue of the thistle. A lovely colour play.
So when I was out there, I also became interested in the history of miniature painting within India, and so I went and spent some time with a miniature guru up in Jaipur.
A miniature guru. Was he very tiny?
He was. He wasn't actually. He was very tall, but he worked with very, very tiny minutiae. Yeah. And he'd sit cross-legged on the floor, which was a killer for me because I'm not very good at that. And spent hours with this minutiae doing this incredible process. And he taught me about patience in a way that I hadn't ever experienced before. And I'd always been very sort of spontaneous with the way that I worked, but there's such a methodology in Indian historic sort of miniature art. There's such a process, And I became more and more fascinated by that with time just going on, the process of that.
So did you paint this picture with that miniature process of Indian miniature paintings?
I've done a lot of miniature in the style of miniature painting, miniature art with pigments. But then this is done with oil paint, which is my default thing that I go back to because I just love oil painting. And I wanted to keep the flatness that you get within the miniature art, but also get that depth, which sometimes there isn't in the miniature.
Yeah, that's very interesting actually. So you're saying within the miniature paintings. Oh, actually, as you get up close to this, it's actually rather nicely, loosely painted actually. Yeah, so but from a distance it looks very exacting, but it's not. It's actually got rather a gentle sort of.
Well, it's like giving the impression more, which when I was being taught by the miniature teacher, he used to get cross with me for not. I felt like I was 9 years old again. I had to learn how to draw an eye in a particular way, and so I'd fill pages upon pages of just nothing but eyes or noses, and then I'd turn a page and then it would be mouths or the ear with an ornament. But then all I wanted to do was do a bit of free range and go with an impression of it, because actually when you're looking at something you don't see it all in focus at once, and so with some of this it's actually out of focus, and some of the spikes are suggested rather than actually coming from the stem, because you don't actually absorb it with your eye in that way all the way through.
Yeah, no, I like the bit at the bottom actually, which I guess is sort of different leaves, but it just looks like a bit of chaos, almost abstract-y sort of crazy marks, but from a distance you read it as the exacting. Yeah, it's very clever. Are your paintings normally quite small, or are they normally?
No, they can be quite big. So I've gone from very large down to tiny, and then I'm working back up to big. So I was then back in the desert doing the grasses of the desert, and I was working towards this exhibition in Delhi with the British Council, but I had to scrap it because of the COVID pandemic, and they had a cut in their budget at the same time, so the whole thing went down. But that was suddenly sort of growing bigger and bigger.
And so, what do you normally paint, as in pictures of? Is it, if it's not?
So it tends to be something that grabs me, whether it's with a mood and a light. I'm very obsessed with light and mood, and so there was, when I was living in Myanmar, there was a building that was a derelict building that just had all these empty spaces. But there was this sense of quietness, but also the sense of different rooms that had an edginess and a sense of chaos within them, where they'd been ramshackled, where they'd been military outposts. And so within each room, I wanted to capture that different mood through colour. So I became obsessed with just quite paring it back to just with the mood, making a different sense of mood within the building. And again, with the desert, I think I'm quite interested in the colour producing a calmness or an edginess about, or a sense of the breeze blowing, or there's a sense of something, but just through the light and the colour. And sometimes I just want to take the colour out and just work with black and white, so I become then very busy with just working with ink. And the tones that you get, say, in Rosalind Davis's work, where she can create within that work there, which is done with watercolour and inks, and a bit of vinyl. She's got the most amazing range of tonality within it, and I'm quite interested in that within painting, that you can actually sort of build that up, either with ink or with paint. And I found, being in a studio space in New Cross next to Graham Crowley, who's generously put us all into this show, he just was just like a legend for telling you what you could and couldn't. He would just suddenly come around and say, just stop there and do this rather than that. And you just, wow, it was just like so clever the way he would just always have the eye and the perfect point of saying where to stop, where to change, where to do this, do that. And it was just such an inspiration being next to a real painter who really had the language that you could actually develop with your work. And you can tend to get slightly sort of stuck when you're not working around other people. But when you've got that inspiration from the energy of Rosalind or being around Graham, it was a very special time for me.
It sounds a wonderful time actually, and the painting is a beautiful, fascinating thing actually, especially when you get closer. It's really interesting. It's a really beautifully painted thing. I really like it. It's lovely.
Thanks very much.
bum buckler.